Good afternoon, everybody. Namaste. So, I welcome you all to the session on marriage, conflict, and spirituality, organized by Sri Aurobindo Foundation for Indian Culture. I, Harshita Krishnaveti, Oro Youth volunteer, will be the moderator for today's session. So, we have with us Ms. Sujata Ameya as our guest speaker in this exploration of how marriage, conflict, and spirituality interact with and affect each other. So, let me introduce our speaker for this session. Sujata Amaya is a relationship and self actualization coach who enables partners in a threshold marriage to reconnect consciously or disengage gracefully and transition powerfully. Sujata holds an MPhil in clinical psychology from NIMHANS, Bangalore, and has maintained a private practice in Hyderabad, India for 28 about more than 28 years. With a transpersonal and integrative approach to psychotherapy, Sujata has helped over 14,000 clients, individuals, couples, families, and groups to use conflict as a catalyst for self discovery and to journey through the trauma of separation as a path to self actualization. Based on her extensive clinical experience, Sujata has designed The Art and Science of the Beloved, a signature workshop that guides participants to playfully discover how they show up in relationships while enabling them to discern if they require therapeutic intervention. Sujata is the author of When the Beloved Calls, a book of poems and artwork based on her personal experience. We are extremely happy to have you with us. So, I request all the viewers to post your questions in the comments box, and we will try addressing all of your questions towards the end of the session. The mother has given us that an ideal marriage is the union at several levels, at physical level, union at the sensations, emotional level, mental level, and even at the psychic level. With these words as the foundation for our exploration, let us begin this session. So, we all know that marriage and conflict can go together in most of the cases. Miss Sujata, I'd like to ask you, can marriage and spirituality go together?
All right. Thank you, Arshita, first for the introduction. And I'd like to extend my gratitude to Safik for having me on this interview. And before I answer your question, I'd like to just set a little framework or a groundwork to what we are going to discuss. So, when I was getting trained in NIMHANS, I can never forget this. We had a professor, our head of department, who always he kind of drilled this into our head that when you're trying to have a conversation, make sure that both parties are on the same page by at least having a working definition of what is it that you're trying to discuss, right? So we have three words in today's topic, and I think we need to have some understanding of that. So I would like to go with an understanding that I have arrived at over the years of my work around these three topics. So marriage is not merely the idea of a wedding and living together and the social legal aspects of it only. To me, the word marriage, if you go back to the root of it, is to be devoted, to be committed, to be married to. So sometimes we use the phrase, "Oh my God, he's married to his work," right? So in that so this talk or these principles that we will be discussing going forward into our discussion pertain not only to married couples but any relationship that is intimate, that involves some kind of cohabitation perhaps, or even if they are not living in the same location, who are intimately and committedly together, right? And this also overrides all gender. This could be for the so-called normal heterosexual couples, same-sex couples, differently oriented people. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So that's how I am, using the word marriage today.
Perfect.
Then we come to conflict. Yeah, we come to conflict. Conflict, we all know what conflict is. Yeah, we are eternally conflicted within ourselves, and we are also at conflict with people in our environment and in our ecosystem. But as we go through the talk, I would like to bring to the table a model that has evolved over my work, where conflict, I look at conflict as a stage in the relationship, not a problem by and of itself. Yeah. So there are
Hmm.
four stages that a relationship goes through in a repeated circular manner, and conflict is one of those stages. Yeah. So that's my definition of conflict for today's discussion. Spirituality, according to me, again, I'm not borrowing anyone's definition here. Spirituality has to do with the timeless and universal principles by which you can, figure out who you are, your place in this cosmos, and by which you will decide what you will pursue and how you will give meaning to your own life. That is how I would define spirituality. The key words here are timeless and universal. By timeless, I mean something that can be applied right now and again and 5,000 years ago and for the next 10,000 years or for eternity. That's the timelessness of the idea. And universal meaning you can be a man or a woman, you can be black or white, you can be Hindu or Muslim. It's universal. It doesn't matter, right? So this is called in the Western literature about India, they have used the word perennial philosophy. It's a evergreen kind of a philosophy, right? And in Indic language, we use the phrase Sanatana Dharma. Dharma meaning rule, law, and Sanatana means eternal, right? So timeless and universal principles that help you figure out who you are, your place in the cosmos, what will you pursue, and how will you bring meaning to your own life. That is what spirituality is. It has nothing to do with religion, guru, cult, method, none of the things that is typically understood. Yeah. So now that I've made this clear, we can proceed to answer your question. So you asked Harshita that not only conflict, can spirituality also go hand in hand with marriage? Well, from this definition, I think the answer is very evident and clear and simple. Of course, because I think fundamentally human beings are meaning seeking machines and meaning making machines. Yeah. So we seek meaning and then we also make meaning sometimes prematurely, sometimes on false premises. Yeah. So because of that fundamental need that we have, when two people come together, you will continue to make meaning and seek meaning out of every experience that you're going through. So of course, spirituality and marriage, I mean, they can't be separated. They're part of me, intricately intertwined.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, I mean it really gives a lot of clarity when you kind of define the terms. I think it lays the foundation for our session as well. So the next question is: marriage is usually perceived differently by different people. Some consider marriage to be a necessity, while others think of it like a burden, and some others even think of it as if it's not necessary at all. So, could you please throw light on the concept and importance of marriage?
Okay. You've opened a hornet's nest, if I may say. Hmm? So to understand and to really get a sense of what's going on, we have to understand what this institution was all about and what is going on right now, and some sense of where it is headed, right? So if you look at it historically, globally, actually, marriage was never about what it is being made out to be today. Today, a marriage is expected to meet the needs of a person that were previously met by an entire community or a village. So it's almost like one person is being expected to meet all those needs that a large community used to meet previously, right? How did marriage originate? I'm not too sure about that, but what are the functions that it, fulfilled? initially, I think marriage had to do with territorial acquisition,
Mm,
political collaboration,
right.
economic security, those kinds of things. Those were the
Mm,
motivators for marriage. And also a socially acceptable system for children to be raised, for the species to continue. These were the fundamental drivers and motivators for people seeking to marry, right? So fundamentally, if a man was good enough to provide for the family and protect, then he was good
mm,
to marry. Yeah. And if a
yes.
woman was able to bear children, look after them, and take care of the family, it was good to marry. And if both of them delivered these roles within the framework that was available, it was a nice, happy marriage. That's it, right? From there, we've moved to this new thing, which is less than, I think, 60 years, 50 years old. This idea of complete and total personal individual fulfillment, which the marriage must provide. Yeah. We also have the idea of purusharthas in the Indic system, right?
Mm.
Which talk about uh, what is that? Dharma, artha,
Dharma,
kama,
artha,
moksha.
kam, moksha, right.
Yeah. So these are the four mandatory pursuits that a human being having come to life is expected to have or proceed
Mm,
with. So, in the Indic ancient tradition, the marriage was also designed and unfolded in a way that it could meet these needs as well. But all of this happened within very carefully defined social, communal, and rule systems where
mm,
it was clear. It was clear who had to do what. The wife had to sit on the left side of the yajna, and the husband had to do this. There's nothing to argue or discuss or anything. Whereas today, everything is open, everything is negotiable, everything needs a conversation, everything needs a discussion, and there is this constant thing of I want to know who I am through your eyes. That is the highest ideal that we are chasing today. So no wonder it's straining and cracking under the burden of that. Yeah. So, if you go with the idea of stability, security, social acceptance, social status, and a certain sense of a contained life experience, then marriage is supposed to provide you that. Whether it is doing that at the moment is open to question. But suppose
mm,
you are the other kind of person, a free spirit who's like, why all this? I want to be open. I want to understand. I want to explore. I want to just do whatever my mind comes to on a given day. Then marriage can be a major bondage. It can make you feel imprisoned and trapped. So it has to do with who you are to see whether this is something that will work for you. Yeah. But you need to be very clear why you're entering it. Most of us enter marriage for very, very unconscious and undefined reasons.
absolutely.
This is my favorite line. I always say this. We date, we date because we've hit puberty. We marry because we've dated long enough and we are running out of time. You're growing older. And then we have children because we're married and everyone's
That's the
expecting a
custom.
baby. Yeah, there's a custom. Everyone's expecting a baby, and also your biological clock is getting older. Whatever reasons
Absolutely.
we get into all this, right? So where is it going to take us, right? So this is a call for a personal, deep inquiry as to what do I want? What do I really want? And then hope that you are able to gauge or sense that in the partner also that you're going to commit to for the rest of your life, at least to begin with. Yeah. I'm saying that to begin with because many marriages are not going on for the rest of their lives.
Yes. Yes. Can I request you to be a little louder because the voice is,
Okay.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So
Do that.
let's continue. So the next question, if one partner is spiritual
Mhm.
and the other is oriented towards materialistic life, the other person is probably motivated by money or power, fame, it could be anything, whereas the other partner is entirely wants to focus on the inward journey. Could you suggest some practical ways to deal with the relationship?
Okay. So before suggesting practical ways and tips, I want to clarify this dilemma itself, right? Am I audible now, Harshita?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
So, the conflict, it may appear to be spiritual versus material, but actually it is not. If you, especially if you look at it from the definition of spirituality, as I just shared, it is a clash of values. It's a clash of what what does one partner really value above something else, and what's the other partner valuing above something else at this point in time. That also is not fixed. That also keeps evolving, and it's a very dynamic thing. In fact, this might be a good time to look at that second slide, Sampathi, if you don't mind. It has a table on it. I think if we discuss that, we'll understand and get to the answer to your question, Harshita.
Yes.
Yes, this one. So this is another favorite model of mine. It's called the four legs model of marital stability and vitality, both. Please
Okay.
note that, right? Okay, so let's go one by one. So let's start with the bottom right, bottom left, right? We're talking about the first leg of the marriage being physical compatibility. By this, I'm not referring necessarily only to sexual compatibility. This includes the entire physicality of one's existence in the presence of another person, right? So, are you comfortable being in the same space? Are you okay to be in the same room? Are you okay to sit on the same sofa? Do you like lounging on the same bed? Do you hug? Do you kiss? Do you pat each other on the back? Do you pinch? Do you, do pillow fights? Are you at ease in your body in the presence of this person? So it's a whole range of things, right? Sharing physical space. That is what it means. The second leg is the top right, which is financial security. Now, this is not about having X amount of money. It is about how both these individuals and the two together as a couple relate to wealth and money, the generation of wealth and the use of money, right? So some people may be secure with a 10 lakh balance. Some people might want 500 crores. It's an individual thing, but it's the way of how, what does money mean to you? Are you both doing okay? Do you have a sense of we are fine and, life is good? It is about that. And that's a very critical leg, right?
Hmm.
The third leg is the right bottom, which is values and worldview. So this is the one that can cause explicit conflicts. The other two cause implicit conflicts. I'm going to come to that. So the explicit conflict is so my favorite example to give here is when once the kids come, this leg becomes like really noisy. So let's say we have an argument about what kind of diapers to buy: cloth diapers, washable and reusable, or the disposable. So typically, one partner will say, "Let's just go to the supermarket and buy them. Why do we have to make life so hard when things are easy? What's the problem?" The other one will say, "No, no, no. Let's buy a cloth diaper." What are they fighting about? They're not fighting about the diaper. They are fighting about one person having this value system of let me contribute to keeping the earth clean and green. The other one has a value system of when there is convenience, why don't we use it and get on with it? Now, is this non-negotiable? No, it can be negotiated. They can talk about it. Maybe they'll arrive at some middle ground, like, okay, when we are doing this long distance travel, let's use the disposable. When we are at home, let's use this. But to arrive at that, the skill required to converse, to discuss, to negotiate is something we are never taught. No one teaches us. The best models of marriage that we grow up with are unfortunately our own parents, who are also victims of the same kind of bonding from their parents. And the other extreme of the model is our Hollywood and Bollywood, where we have only stars, we have nothing else, right? So between these two extremes, we are left to our own devices to figure out what to do in a relationship, right? So this is the values and the worldview. So everything that a couple is fighting about, if you really distill it and bring it down, it comes down to closely held values, which are in turn tied up with their identity. that is not who I am. I don't do such things. Or that is who I am. I have to do that. These are the
Hmm.
two drivers for each person, right? So that's the third leg. The fourth leg is social identity. Now, this has become even more important now in the current times that we are living in, right? So in the past, at least my parents' generation, even my generation at this point, a majority of the marriages, once the wedding happened and the girl shifted homes, the couple had a identity together. So they would be invited together, they would show up together, they would go out together, they would shop together, they would fight together, they would eat together. There was an identity as a unit, as a couple, right? But of late, each person, the wife and the husband, both have their own individual identities, even if they're not professionally engaged, even if they are not working kind of people, each has their own identity. Each has their own network, their own friends, their own social circles, their own kitty parties, their own boys parties. Everything is there. So what happens sometimes, and not sometimes, quite often in many couples, is that they may be invited as a couple, but if there is not enough of the communion between the two, they may show up separately in social spaces. So the social identity of them as a married couple together is rather weak. This is also true with close relationships, like within the family, the in laws, the extended family, the close relatives, or even the far off relatives. If they all are not even aware who you got married to, whether that person lives with you or lives elsewhere or working somewhere, that makes that leg very, very shaky. Yeah. So these are the four ways a marriage can shake slash rock. Both things can happen. Now, in this, let me also say that for understandable reasons, I think the the one leg that can contaminate all others is physical compatibility. So another favorite line of mine is in a reasonably working marriage. Yeah, in a reasonably working marriage, sex occupies 20% of weightage. It's happening, it's there, nobody really pays too much attention to it. But if there's a difficulty in that area, either insufficiency or lack of satisfaction or some kind of a difficulty, then that contaminates the 100% of the relationship. And sex
Hmm.
is not just about what you do in the bed. It is about that very deep, personal, intimate, mischievous connection that a couple shares throughout the day. So if that goes missing, then we have big trouble. So this leg single-handedly can make the table very wobbly, yeah, followed by finances, followed by values, followed by social identity. Yeah. So social identity also, I've worked with couples where they are at loggerheads and they want to run far away from each other, but they stay on strangely, not saying, oh, because we have children, but because they get along famously and fabulously with their families. The son-in-law is a pet in the in-laws house and the daughter-in-law is worshipped in this side of the house, and they're like, how can I be disloyal to these people? So that's how strong social identity can be in holding a marriage together. Yeah.
Yes.
So now coming to your question of tips. So see, just like this is like physical health. You can have some tips like do some intermittent fasting, eat right, and do the gym and go to sleep. That is not really sustainable. That is not workable because the ailment runs deep. The root cause of the issues are deeper, and they are deeper in the relationship. They're even more deeper within yourself, your own unexamined, childhood experiences, unexamined limiting beliefs, unconscious visions and desires and wishes, and large gaps between how you're currently really living your life and what you think you should be doing. All of
Hmm.
these can show up as strife, right? So if there is conflict, now I'll come to the other thing. It is an
Right.
extraordinary opportunity to do something, which we will discuss. But let me pause here if you have the next question, Harshita.
Yeah, so the next question is, in spite of trying different ways to adjust in marriage, there are people who kind of give in to different ways. But in spite of doing all that, if one partner chooses to lead a spiritual life, and ends up separating from the other, chooses, decides to finally get separated from the other, what do you think could be the challenges, especially if a child is involved?
Okay. So your question, Harshita, has two parts actually. So
Hmm.
let me see how we can break this down. So first of all, I want to make a statement that spirituality has to enhance your ability to live with the moment in front of you that your life is bringing to you in your specific role and situation. If your spirituality is causing you trouble in that department, you need to also examine what you're doing in the name of spirituality. Let me say that. Okay? Spiritual pursuit is not supposed to create difficulty and more mess. Okay, that's one side of the story. However, having said that, what you're asking is an explicit conflict in leg number three, which is values and worldview. What does this mean? This means in the couple, one partner wants to do what the regular, normal married life unfolding shows,
Hmm.
right? Which is let's get married, then let's get a better job, then let's get a car, let's get another car, let's build a house, or let's have babies, or let's have holidays, let's do this, let's do that. And I've heard people say, why now spirituality? I mean, am I so old? We'll see after later, so they have certain notions of what spirituality is also, which drives this conflict. So my recommendation would be, can you first look at what is it that you're conflicted about? And
Hmm.
perhaps it is not to do with, you're spiritual, I'm not spiritual, let's split. Maybe it's not that simple. Maybe there's something else. Okay, this is second part. The third part is many a times, not many a times, I almost want to say without exception, I have seen this in my work, in my own life as well. Spirituality of the kind which involves, um, a very, very deep, obsessive involvement with the teacher, the guru, or the method or the path is often an escape from something that is not working very well in the relationship. Yeah. So
Yeah.
then, which is fine because you're having trouble and conflict and you really want some solace and some understanding and some, escape from it. You're going there. But then, that should in turn help you deal with this. If that is pulling you out of this, then you need to examine what you're chasing as well. That is the third thing. Fourth thing, there are some actual so-called spiritual paths where the teachers or the gurus actually insist, encourage breaking up. And so please be wary of all of that. I want to end this part of the question by saying, um, the wait, I lost my train of thought. Um,
Yeah, there are people who.
yeah, if oh yeah, I got it. So here's the thing. Usually, spirituality without psychological work is going to take you on an empty trip. You will fall off the wagon sooner or later, and vice versa. Just doing and breaking your head over endless hours of psychological discussion is also not going to take you anywhere. It's going to make you very exhausted. So you need both. You need psycho spiritual approach to understanding what's happening in the marriage. But having said that, I would give primacy to psychology because you need to work with your ego and your demons and your beliefs and your childhood wounds and your traumas to be able to really understand what is this whole idea of the divine and this transcendence or the transformation from the identity based person to something else, right? So if usually spirituality is used as a bypass, as a shortcut to avoid all these things, and it has caused more havoc in marriages than the marriages left to themselves to have conflict. If you notice, some of our senior couples, they fight like cats and dogs, but they're inseparable and not in a hostile or a negative way. Not like that. I mean, there are some which are painfully difficult marriages, that's different. But in a lot of cases, but at the end of the day, they both have the ability to say, "Oh, that's just how he is." Oh, yeah, that's what she will do. So there is an incredible acceptance of the other person, isn't it? That's just who they are. Yeah. So that is lived wisdom leading you into a spiritual opening of being accepting of the person the way they are. So that's what the spiritual path is supposed to do for you. So my suggestion would be if there are conflicts, first work on it at the psychological level, sort out all the mess there, then explore spirituality. Applying directly spiritual principles into this space can be a little slippery, a lot slippery actually. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I think spirituality and psychology are somewhere embedded with each other. And also, Sri Aurobindo says that all life is yoga. I mean, you can't separate spirituality from your life. Whatever you do in your life, I think, as an offering, if you continue to do, I think that's the best way. Wonderful. So, the next question, probably continuing what you've asked, what do you think would be an impact on a woman if she chooses to separate? Because you know how the societal expectations and attitudes kind may have an effect on her decision. How do you think it can play out for women in specific?
I think in the previous question you asked about if there's a child involved as well. So
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
like to answer
So we can
both.
pick up,
I'd like to
please.
answer both things. Okay, so let me tackle the first thing first. So this is another radical statement I make always. Okay, do not use or justify the children to make decisions about your relationship. So never say this marriage sucks, but I'm staying because of the children,
Sure.
and never say this marriage is painful. So in order to save the children, I'm leaving it. Both extremes are not okay. You make the decisions for yourself, and here's why. Here's why. Children are extraordinarily aware of what is going on at a energetic, organismic, basic, deep level. They may not have the verbal skill or the cognitive development to express their knowing of what's going on. So they know what's going on. Now, if you say that, oh, because of the children I'm staying here, you're making a series of blunders there. One is you're teaching the child that it is better to pretend that all is well when all is not well. Number two, you're also role modeling to the child dysfunctional and ineffective ways of how to be a man, a husband, a father, and a citizen of this world. Why same way, a woman, a mother, a wife, and a lady in this world, right? You're teaching them very wrong models because if you're tied up with hostility or coldness with each other, that is what you will be teaching. You are bringing up the child in a so-called unbroken frame of an unbroken home, but seeped and immersed in very toxic emotional spiritual ambience. So you're actually damaging the child on a daily basis by doing that. Yeah? Children's mental health is much better in separated families where both the parents continue to remain in touch with the child and maintain cordiality between each other during interactions rather than having parents who are at loggerheads 24/7 and the
Hmm.
child is scared and terrified of not knowing what is going to evoke what storm in the house, right? So these are all the reasons. Lastly, and probably this is the most important reason, you're also teaching the child unwittingly that uh, even if you're miserable, you should just put up with it,
Yeah, like a
as though
pretense.
happiness, yeah, as though happiness has no value, as though the need, your own needs have no value, or your own pursuits have no value. So I think using children as a reason to do this or that is not healthy. That's all I would say. Okay, coming to women, yes, you're right. Women have an extra set of issues to deal with if they decide to separate. I think there are some general things which we all know in terms of a stigma, a taboo, a sense of shame, a sense of inferiority, a sense of failure, and a sense of fear. But also, I think at the bottom of all this, I think the greatest fear that a woman has is the sense of being treated with less respect than she would have, even if she were in a daily kind of an abusive marriage. By less, and that less respect has different manifestations. It could be unwanted looks, unwanted touch, unwanted invitations, unwanted comments, unwanted pursuits. It can come in different gradations, but the
Mm.
fundamental thing is disrespect. It's almost like if a woman takes the call to walk out of the marriage, she is dangerous. So this also goes back to the same old thing of how if the feminine, by that I don't mean women as gender, but the feminine energy, if that is let loose, people are scared of it. So these are general issues that are there, and I think each person how they transition from that decision to actually recreating and rebuilding a new life, it's a whole other planet of inner work, and that's what I do actually. That's what helping couples either figure out how to reconnect in a very conscious way or to disengage in a gracious manner and then transition powerfully, because having made that decision, can you now stand by it and face it and create something completely unimagined from a previous space? And there are many, many, many such women and also men. The journey is no less painful for men as well. Yeah? So that's
Yeah. All right. I think we touched upon this concept. However, what do you think is the importance of sex in a marital relationship? If one partner is sexually inclined, whereas the other is not really for it, and maybe sometimes even repulsive, how do you think can such couples go about the relationship?
okay. So this leg of the marriage is the most sensitive one. If there's trouble in that department, it will trouble the entire marriage sooner or later. Yeah, it is an important thing. Now, how do you navigate this? Because this is going to happen. You know, not only there are variations in the libido levels of individuals, and this is, by the way, gender indifferent. Huh? It is not that men have some crazy libido and women are not ever interested in sex. It's not like that. Multiple factors go into it. Yeah,
Mm.
age and work and health and children and in-laws and privacy and promotion and you name it. Anything can affect that area. How do you navigate this? So I think it comes back to the same thing. Sex is not the one of the things on the checklist to finish because you're a married couple. Sex is the outcome of a series of connected interactions between the couple over a period of time. And I'm not talking about foreplay. I'm talking about the deep sense of connectedness. So this could be a small WhatsApp about how are you, what are you up to. This could be a note in the lunchbox if the wife is packing lunch. This could be a little look of I get you, I see you, or this could be an offer of what can I get you. It is about really being in touch with that person through the day that will then culminate in sex. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, assuming this is available and yet, one of them is not interested, the first thing I would suggest is, of course, to check if everything's okay. Go to a doctor, find out if you have something fixable or something not fixable, or the
Uh,
worst here. Yeah.
just to add there, I think by choice, if they don't want to do it, it's not because of the biological reason, but if they
Uh-huh.
choose to not indulge in sex.
Yes, so I'm coming to that. So if that is not the issue, if that is not the issue, and this is, someone just feeling that they don't want to do it, then I think it is difficult for the marriage to work because one of the reasons and one of the expectations why people get married is to have sex with one person in a committed fashion.
Mm.
And that's something one expects, right? So then it's difficult. Then I think the massive amounts of negotiation will have to go on between the two of them to come to some kind of an agreement. I don't know, right? And there are situations where such a scenario has led to this so-called open marriage where
Um,
because one partner is unable or unwilling to engage sexually with the other partner, they have done what seems to be the next best thing, which is quote unquote give them permission to go, uh, relate to other people. Uh, these are normally recipes for disaster,
Hmm.
because it is not a simple transaction.
Hmm.
There are just so many variables that go into it, and over a period of time, this causes trouble. If not over a period of time, actually much sooner. So I would still suggest that, even if there's no problem and they don't want to have sex, then they should think about whether they need to stay married at all. Or if both of them are in the same kind of a spiritual pursuit and both of them are deciding to give up sex as one of these spiritual practices, that's a different story. That's a
Hmm.
different story.
Yes. Fine. So, moving on. We heard, I mean, we discussed also in the session that marriage does requires adjustments from both the partners. So, to what extent you do you think that a person should make, or rather, should adjust to make a marriage work?
All right. So, see, when we speak about adjustment, we have to have a sense or a standard or a measure of it, right?
Mm,
So, for example, if my portion of the sofa is here and you're kind of coming into it, I have to adjust, then I know how much to adjust. So, what does this mean? We have to have a starting line or a marking line to talk about how much have I adjusted, and is that in keeping with myself and my readiness, and is that also understood and acknowledged by the other person. So it's a complex cycle, right? So before we talk about adjustments, we should speak about expectations, because
yes.
what are you adjusting to? You're adjusting to expectations, right? So I always give this little table. We talk about three columns. One is needs, one is wants slash desires, and the last is entitlements. Yeah, these are the three. So under the heading of expectation, you have these three columns, right? Needs are a no-brainer. You you're married to this person, you need him to be in your life. So there is the whole thing of being exclusive, being committed, staying there, showing care, being respectful, being trusting. All of those things are there. Wants are, it would be good to have the desirables, right? It would be, I would want you to come with me for a walk, I would want you to come with me for a movie, I would want us to go on a vacation. So these
Mm,
come under good to have but not
yes.
critical, not essential, right?
Absolutely.
The entitlements are where we get into trouble.
Mm,
Entitlements are expectations, most of the time hidden and unconscious, based on conditioning and modeling of what we see around us. So a wife is supposed to behave like this, a husband is supposed to do that. So if those are not articulated openly and agreed upon, then they can create havoc, because this person is expecting that they should know, that they have to do, that's what they're expected to do, and the other
mm,
person is clueless, right? So that's where trouble begins. So if there is a dialogue about what do I absolutely must have, this is non-negotiable, you can't escape this, versus this would be preferable if you do, it'll really make me feel delighted, but it's okay if you don't do it once in a while, versus something that I will hell never do, right? These three things have to be spoken about. There has to be a negotiation and agreement about this. Then you can think of adjustments. Then you can talk about, yeah, I agreed to do this, but today not happening, can you adjust? Then you can talk about it. That's one big part of it. The other section of your question is about to what extent. Now
mm,
that's another Pandora's box. Okay, so some of us who have porous sense of ourselves, porous boundaries, and are brought up with a lot of role conditioning, tend to go on adapting and adjusting endlessly to the
mm,
extent of making the relationship dysfunctional. And then there are some of us who have rigid boundaries, who have the opposite of the conditioning. They're in the state of rebellion at all times. That's their identity. They will not adjust at all. And by some cosmic joke, these two varieties always get married to each other. It doesn't matter whether it's an arranged marriage or a love marriage or what it is. That's how it is. Yeah. So and it brings me to my next point, which is why I say that marriage is an extraordinary opportunity for self-discovery,
Right.
individuation, and arriving at your own inner wholeness. Yeah. So this couple will force each other to, rectify that inner imbalance that they are dealing with. One is so
Hmm.
rigid, one is so fluid that there is no sense of individual contribution to the marriage. It's like a Siamese twin situation. Yeah. So
Hmm.
that's the other part. The last part of it is sometimes, the more you adjust, the more you suffer. That is a whole other scenario where perhaps the other partner has a psychiatric condition or a psychological disorder and it needs to be examined. It is not to be solved by adjustment or loving or unconditional love. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think both being conscious of what your needs, wants, and entitlements, and also communicating. I think both of these play a role, as you said. Given how difficult marriage tends to be, if a person chooses to remain unmarried,
Mhm.
what challenges would they will they probably face, or what are the repercussions of such a decision?
Okay, this again, this again is a very individual thing, right? So there are some people who absolutely abhor the idea of a close relationship.
Right.
They just think it's like, what the hell? Why would you even want to be in a relationship like that? Now, if such a person ends up being married, they are definitely going to be miserable. They're going to make the other person also very miserable, right? On the other hand, a vast majority lives day on day in this massive romantic fantasy of having this incredible communion with some twin flame or a soulmate. Those people, if they are denied a relationship, they will die of that. So it's a very individual, it's a very individual thing. And then there is the other, large chunk which gets married and then discovers that they are not made for marriage. That also is there. So I think it's a personal choice. I don't think we can look at what will happen, what will not happen, what should they look out for. I don't think it's anything like that. Beyond the usual social thing, right? See, in our country especially, the coffee table conversation or the you know conversation on the nukkad always is shadi kab kar rahe ho, and
Yeah,
finally when you give them an answer to that it is like bacche kab aa rahe hain.
absolutely.
There's an unending stream of questions. So if you're immune to that, it doesn't matter whether you're married, unmarried, or much married, or you have three marriages. It matters. It's a question of how you handle it. Yeah.
Yeah. As we probably come to the end of this question and answer session, could you
Mhm.
share your thoughts on how can married couples use marriage as an instrument of personal growth and mutual development?
Awesome. Awesome. So, how much time do we have? Okay, we have time.
Yeah.
There are two things I'd like to share here, Harshita. One is that these are another two of my models. One has to do with what are the ingredients that go into creating intimacy. Remember, I was talking about how you need to be connected to even either have sex or make a marriage work for the next 40 years, right? So, I want to talk about that briefly and then come to your question, this last question of how marriage can be a path to individuation and wholeness. Yeah. So I quickly want to go through this because this is important. These are the skills that we are not taught, and we kind of stumble and fumble and hopefully learn. So if you see at the bottom of it is exclusivity. That's the foundation. By that, what I mean is it's not that we are both just in an exclusive relationship with each other as a long term thing, not that way. But in the moment that I'm interacting with you, is my attention exclusively focused on you? Or am I looking at the mobile or am I listening to some song or am I cooking? What am I? Exclusivity is a moment by moment commitment, not one long term thing with the Mangal Sutra, etc. Yeah, so that's that. Of course, in other layers, it also goes to remaining faithful. Yeah, so faithfulness has to do with that. So the first circle here on the left is left bottom is respect. Respect is not merely about excuse me, please, thank you, sorry. It is this fundamental interface with life where you carry the attitude that even though the other one is very different from who I am, and even though I don't quite understand the other person, they have as much right and legitimacy to exist as I have on this earth. Is that basic respect of allowing things to be because they are there. This is the concept of ahimsa, non violation of someone's existence and space and boundary. Yeah. Next, right bottom, trust. Trust is a no brainer, of course. We begin with trust as though it's a given. And then, if we are not careful, we can very quickly lose it. So, trust has to do with the congruence between speech and action. Simple. That's it. You say what you mean what you say, and then you do what you say. So, if there's an incongruence in this repeatedly, perpetually, then you are messing up with the trust in the relationship. Of course, again, this has gradations all the way to infidelity. Yeah, that is also there. Then the third top right is care. Care has to do with understanding to the extent possible, because we are not psychic readers, listening and understanding the needs of the partner and trying to meet them to the best of your ability. So, this is not about becoming God. This is not becoming a lifelong caretaker. This is not about becoming a parent to the. This is about basic humanness of noticing what is required and offering it to the person that keeps the relationship nurtured and fresh. Yeah, that's care. And the last circle is commitment. Commitment again is not in the way it's understood now. Commitment has to do with no matter what we are facing together, we will work with it as a team rather than as adversaries, meaning we are on the same side of the net in this game. We are not playing against each other
Okay.
on opposite sides of the net. Yeah. So
Yes.
if this now, if you see, there's an infinity loop that connects all four of them. That is because one feeds the other in a ongoing loop. One can deplete the other also in an ongoing loop. So just as those four legs, these four also, if one is strong, the other ones continue to gain strength. If one is weak, the other ones can also be affected. So this is a quick check about where am I making a mistake? How can I quickly rectify it? Yeah? So this is the thing about intimacy. So this is what will create intimacy, not merely sexual intimacy, but a soul level intimacy between two people. And this model applies everywhere. It can be workplaces as well, not merely marital or cohabitation relationships. Yeah. All right. Now we'll go to the last slide, which is the cyclical nature of relationship. So, if you don't mind, Harshita, could you repeat your question, because I want to make sure I'm answering the right thing. The last
Yeah.
question you asked.
So, married couples, how can married couples use marriage as an instrument of personal growth and mutual development?
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. So I'd like to take you through this diagram here to help you understand what we're talking about. So remember, at the beginning I said conflict is not a thing, but it's a stage in a relationship. Now this
Yeah.
is what I mean. Because relationship by its nature is cyclical, conflict will be one stage you will go through, sometimes every hour, sometimes every day, sometimes every week, sometimes every 3 weeks, sometimes every month. It depends on the couple, yeah, and the issues that you're facing, things that you're dealing with in your life. So what happens is stage one is connection, bottom right. That is where you have this feeling of this is the person I've been waiting for. This is the one for me. I must get married, and I'm going to have this extraordinarily fulfilling life with this person. That is the connection that draws you into and towards each other, and that's what makes you get into a marriage or get into a committed relationship,
Hmm.
exclusive relationship. And very soon, very soon, or even as you are getting into the engagement and wedding and marriage phase itself, conflict begins. That's the top quarter. right? Right? Conflict starts. Now, as I've explained previously, conflict has so many factors, variables, facets to it. Let's not get into that, but that is stage two. So, stage two is where things are unraveling right now because we don't understand that there are two more stages to it, right? Stage two, either people go to therapy, get better, or go to therapy, fall apart, go to spirituality, get better, go to spirituality, and fall apart. We are kind of exiting the circle at this second stage. Actually, there are two more stages. So, from here, the loop goes this way. The third stage is chrysalis.
Mhm.
Chrysalis, if you know, is the cocoon. The pupa that goes inside the self-made cocoon and sits there for a certain length of time before it can emerge as a butterfly. And
Hmm.
what does this mean? This is a conflict usually arises because a mirror is being held to something in you that you are not aware of, or you're aware of but you don't want to look at. Yeah? That, ultimately, in a relational space, conflict is that. The other person is reflecting to you something that you're not aware of in yourself or something that you do not want to face. So it is actually an amazing opportunity to go inwards, to really retreat into your inner space, face your own self, face your own demons, look at what you're, owning, disowning, rejecting, fudging, and what transformative possibility is there to work with when that thing has been shown to you. Who can you become from there? Yeah. So when you emerge, like the butterfly emerges, you're a slightly different person. You're not the same person who fought. You're a slightly different person here. And that creates a possibility of the fourth stage, which is communion. What's the difference between connection and communion is a more conscious, choice based readiness to engage with the other person in an open, vulnerable, and authentic way. Yeah. When you do this for a bit, and here I give the example of I think those are hedgehogs or partridges. They have those spiky things on top of them. In the winter, they huddle together because it's very cold. Then once
Hmm.
they get very cold, very close to each other, they poke each other. Then they go far off. Then they come back, then they go far off. That's how marriage is. So too much communion can also be very difficult. Believe me, it is a very positive stage there, but that also it's a wonderful stage to rest and replenish, but it is not a growth promoting stage. The growth promoting stage is this axis. The conflict chrysalis axis is the growth promoting axis. The connection communion axis is the replenishment and rest and enjoyment axis. So you need all of them. Without that, relationship is not going to happen. So as you circle this infinite loop of connection, conflict, chrysalis, communion, you are interfacing this thing of individuation and wholeness. By that, what I mean is individually you come to face with who you are as a person. You come into yourself as a man, as a woman, as an individual. You get to have a more sharper, chiseled identity. Yeah. And I'm talking about psychological identity. Spirituality will tell you to not have an identity. You can give up an identity if you have one. If you have no identity, let's not talk about giving it up. Yeah, to say I surrender my ego, first have the ego. So this is what we are talking about, right? And the second part is wholeness. Wholeness particularly has to do with the gender thing, the patriarchy related issues that have happened between the genders, and how women survive on half their power and men also survive on half their power. Men disown and reject their feminine qualities. Women abhor and reject their masculine qualities, and both show up as half individuals in the marriage. So this conflict chrysalis forces you to confront all that and become a whole person, a whole entire individual. So the process of individuation and wholeness, without that, we are not prepared for spiritual pursuits. So therefore, I have the premise that marriage is a brilliant opportunity to do this. I mean, it's fun. You have a companion to do it with, rather than going off all alone to the Himalayas and sitting in a dark cave. So that's my take on it. Yeah. So I hope this answers your question, Arshita.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one question from a participant.
Mhm.
So I'll just read that out to you. Can unconsciously made decision of marriage, um, or rather can consciously decide to the fate of marriage, to continue it or not? Is it something to live despite of however the relationship is? Can somebody live probably despite how the relationship is, if it has not made the decision of getting married consciously?
See, whether you make the decision consciously or unconsciously. So I'm going to say something slightly esoteric. It may sound a little radical. We think that we are making some conscious decisions. I mean, why would anybody unconsciously go and get married? You know how these discussions go. The parents will say, oh, until the children say yes, we are not going to agree, we are not going to force them. And the children will all say, only if I really like, I will say yes. So we think we are very conscious in making this choice, but I think there's something much larger at play in how people come together in marriage and how things unfold. And perhaps there is a karmic angle to it. Yeah, that's for another discussion. Let's not go into it today. So, to answer this question, in any case, marriage happens in semi-consciousness. Let's work with that. Yeah. Now, if your growing consciousness is becoming incompatible with that unconscious agreement, you'll have to do something about it. I
Hmm.
don't think anymore people have that ability to just endure and suffer and go on. I don't think we are of that stage. We are at that stage of evolution anymore. This time is calling people to inquiry, introspection, and action. Yeah. So the action need not mean that the marriage has to break. The action could be that can we explore this to see how we can renegotiate the relationship, isn't it? That's also possible. And usually, when people stay in a marriage, it's either the children, unfortunately, because of the children, supposedly, or it's because they cannot imagine what they can do with themselves because they are so conditioned to being a part of the couple. Yeah. So, conscious disengagement, that's one of the things I was talking about in my work, is a massive journey. It is about literally chiseling out your identity from that clubbed identity of a couple. And that's a very frightening and very daunting task. It's not easy. And it's not for everyone also. Yeah. So some people actually say, you know what, there's nothing left in this marriage.
Hmm.
Uh, we just can't see eye to eye on most things. But it's okay. We get along, and we are doing all right, and we have some common things to look at, and we have our children to also deal with. So it's okay. We will manage. So they may separate symbolically, they may separate psychologically, they may separate in the bedrooms, they may separate in terms of houses, but they will remain married, and that's fine. That's fine. Every choice is legit as long as you do it from the right motive. It has to be true to you. That's the thing. There's no judgment about either leaving the marriage or staying in the marriage. As long as you know what you're doing and why. I think that's important. So being true to yourself is the bottom line. And that brings us all the way back to spirituality. Isn't that what that is about? Being
Absolutely.
true to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have another question. What about the role of parents and in-laws in marriage? How can the couple set boundaries with respect to these relations?
Okay. This one I don't even know how to answer in a simple way. There are two layers to this at the very least. Okay, so one is this interactional social layer where some negotiation has to happen. That we'll meet at this time, or we'll stay for this many hours, or this is what we will do, or this is what we can't do. Simple things like that. But the deeper layer is one of the partners has not sufficiently individuated. So they don't even know what they want, or they are unable to be assertive enough to state what they want. Then we have big drama, big trouble. Yeah. So it's not a simple answer. As always, I say it's a very couple dependent thing, and they need to figure it out, and they can seek help to figure it out from professionals.
Another question. Why do you think open marriages cannot work at all? the participant wants to know the reason why is it a disaster.
The sexual freedom supposedly given by both partners to each other, it is not merely a transactional engagement. It never is. So my practice is full of, I'll tell you what my practice is full of. People thinking that it's just a one night stand, it's just a fling, it just
Mm,
happened, it's just drunk. Those people developing emotional connection and feelings towards that so called fling, and now having massive trouble in their existing relationship or marriage. So what does it, and this is gender independent again. It's not that women tend to have more emotional connection and men are just sleeping around. That's not true, right?
mm,
So it can be both ways. So what does that mean? That means sex is not merely a bodily transaction. There's something more going on in that space. So I think you need to be careful where you're going to do it. Where are you going to, who are you going to take it to? So, however, now usually when I say this, the immediate retort is then what do I do if I'm sexually not satisfied? Exactly. Deal with the issue, confront the issue, face your partner, drag them to a doctor, figure out the problem, and then honor the situation first in that space, and then do something that is legit, that is wholesome, that is healthy, and that will not make you feel that you have lived a compromised life. That is,
mm.
it's a whole lot of depth to it. It's not just about it's okay, we'll take it light. It's not like that. It
Yeah.
affects you. It affects you in a very deep core way. So it's important that you're careful about it.
Yeah, one interesting question. How can one forgive the partner in when there's infidelity in the relationship? How to cultivate this forgiveness towards infidelity?
This, this is another biggie. This is the reason I'm very scared of interviews on this topic. Every question begs a 3 hour discussion. So infidelity again is a very, very complex situation, uh, because 99% of the time the partner who has stepped out of the marital boundary is regretful of what they have done in causing the hurt to the spouse or the partner, but they're not regretful of having done what they have done.
Right.
So you have to understand this duality, apparent duality, right? So what have they done? They have gone seeking aliveness, which has gone missing in this relationship. Apparently, that's usually the explanation, and it is true as well. Marriage tends to become a drudgery if you're not, alert. If you're not alert, you fall into those happy gudda guddy roles. मैं खाना बनाती तुम बाहर जाके कमा के लाओ
Mm.
हमारे बच्चे होंगे बच्चों
Mechanical.
का करेंगे so you just become mechanical providers or role deliverers, and the spark that makes you an individual and the chemistry that connects you both starts dying very soon actually. Yeah. So if something outside is visible where you feel visible in that person's eyes, where you feel mirrored in that person's presence, then that becomes a big attraction, so this person will proceed, right? So they are actually the most people think of it as some very beautiful experience, so they're never sorry about that. They're sorry about the pain this person has caused. So the other partner, who's the recipient or the victim of the infidelity, often has this demand that they should also feel bad for the thing they have done. That's where the forgiveness issue becomes very complicated. It's not
Mm.
enough that you messed with what we had. You should say sorry for what you've done, and you should completely stop being in touch with this person, etc., etc. All of that, which is by the way necessary to restore this marriage. All connections with any external agents have to be cut off. That is also true. But so again, I'm coming back to the same thing. This is an individual journey. The only thing I would say is Do not force forgiveness upon yourself. So this also, I have a very different definition of forgiveness. Okay. Forgiveness is about living the pain until your heart expands to accommodate the event without emotional pain or without
Hurt.
ravaging memories until you until you learn something from that experience which enriches you, which expands you, which makes you a better and a different person. Until you get the gain from the pain, you will not be able to forgive. It's not possible. So why do we have to force ourselves to forgive? It's okay. It's okay feeling the pain. Why do you want to forgive? Because you're tired of the pain. But then the day you are fully done with the pain, it won't stay longer than it's supposed to stay. And forgiveness will naturally occur. It is not something that we can craft. It is something that will emerge.
Mm, right. So I think we have anyway crossed the time. So some of the questions, participants, I think some of them have been addressed in the initial part of the session. So you could please look into that. Um, yeah, I think we can wind up the session. Thank you so much, Sujata, for such an insightful session. I would say, like, heart touching. There are a lot of deeper concepts which you have discussed and given us a new perspective towards how these three, marriage, conflict, and spirituality, are intertwined, and just conflict is a phase which is to be considered. And that was rather as a process of what do you say, marriage as a process of individuation and wholeness. I think that message really strikes hard for me. So it was wonderful. It was a great session. Thank you so much, and thank you all
Thank you,
the
Harshita.
viewers. Yes.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you, uh, moderate the whole conversation. Lovely. It was really nice. This is a topic closest to my heart. I've spent 30 years doing this and nothing else. And I do cherish opportunities to speak about this and share whatever I have learned. And you know what? Before we close, let's have that last slide. I think that summarizes everything for anyone who's joined in late or something. Sampaji, the very last slide.
Yeah, also, I think I'd like to thank all the viewers for being there for today's session. And it was great
Yes,
having you all and ask questions. That shows us that, yes, it's not only both of us, but you are there with us in this session.
yes,
And
yes. And for the lovely questions. Yes. So I just want to summarize with these 5 points, which pretty much captures everything that I've been saying, right? First is the search for relationship is a disguised search for the self. Please understand that. And when you fully and securely belong to yourself, you can fully belong in a relationship. Conflict in any relationship serves as a catalyst for self discovery. Heartbreak in an intimate relationship unlocks a profound opportunity for self actualization. And purpose, we were talking about meaning and purpose. Purpose does not reveal itself as a grand epiphany. It unfolds slowly, one choice at a time, which is in how you deal with conflict, your purpose can evolve. Yeah, so I really wanted to say that. There's someone asking for how to contact me, Sampatji. Maybe you can just show the last slide, which has my email and phone number, and then we can close. I once again want to thank Safik and Sampadananda ji for inviting me for this talk, and Harshita for doing such a lovely job of the question and answer session. Thank you so much. It was just a pleasure. Thank you.